Marcus Johnson never imagined that his simple job as a night security guard would change his life forever. At 52 years old, he had worked many different jobs throughout his career, but nothing had prepared him for what he would encounter at the Riverside Veterans Medical Center in downtown Portland. The building stood tall against the city skyline, its windows reflecting the orange glow of streetlights as Marcus began his first shift. He had been hired to patrol the medical facility during the overnight hours, making sure the building stayed secure while patients slept, and the skeleton crew of nurses worked their rounds. The pay was decent, the work seemed straightforward, and Marcus appreciated the quiet nature of the job after years of dealing with difficult customers in retail and construction work. What Marcus didn't know on that first night was that the medical center housed a special wing dedicated to treating Marines who had returned from overseas deployments. These were not ordinary patients. Many of them carried invisible wounds from their service, struggling with nightmares, anxiety, and memories that haunted them long after they had left the battlefield. The wing operated under strict security protocols, and previous guards had often complained about the challenging nature of working around these particular patients. During his orientation, the head of security, Mrs. Rodriguez, had warned Marcus about the difficulties he might face. Some of the Marines experienced episodes during the night, she explained. They might wake up confused, thinking they were still in combat zones. Others suffered from severe anxiety that made them suspicious of anyone they didn't recognize. Previous security guards had requested transfers after just a few weeks, unable to handle the stress of dealing with patients who sometimes viewed them as potential threats rather than helpers. Marcus listened carefully to these warnings, but something inside him felt drawn to the challenge. He had always believed in treating people with dignity and respect, regardless of their circumstances. His own father had served in the military during the Korean War, and Marcus had grown up hearing stories about the bonds between service members and the difficulties they faced when returning home. Though he had never served himself, he carried a deep respect for those who had chosen to put their lives on the line for their country. On his first patrol through the Marines' wing, Marcus encountered his first real test. As he walked quietly down the dimly lit hallway, checking door locks and ensuring everything was secure, he heard shouting from one of the rooms. Through the small window in the door, he could see a young Marine, probably in his mid-20s, sitting up in his bed with his fists clenched, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. The Marine was yelling about incoming mortars and ordering invisible soldiers to take cover. Marcus could see the terror in the young man's eyes, and his first instinct was to call for a nurse or doctor to handle the situation. But something made him pause. He remembered his father's stories about nightmares that would wake him up decades after his war had ended, and how important it was to have someone who understood nearby during those dark moments. Instead of walking away, Marcus gently knocked on the door and spoke in a calm, steady voice. He didn't try to enter the room or get too close, understanding that the Marine might perceive him as a threat in his confused state. Instead, Marcus simply began talking about normal, everyday things. He mentioned the weather outside, the quiet halls of the medical center, and the safety of being back home on American soil. Slowly, the Marine's breathing began to steady. His eyes started to focus on Marcus's face through the door window. Marcus continued talking in his gentle way, sharing stories about his own daily routine and asking simple questions about the Marine's name and where he was from. Within 20 minutes, the young man had calmed down completely and was able to recognize where he was and what had happened. When the night nurse arrived to check on the situation, she found Marcus and the Marine having a quiet conversation through the door about their shared love of baseball. The nurse was amazed. Previous security guards would typically call for medical intervention immediately, which often resulted in sedation or restraints for the patient. Marcus had managed to help the Marine work through his episode using nothing but patience and human connection. Word of this incident spread quickly among the medical staff. Dr. Sarah Chen, who oversaw the Marine's wing, made a point of introducing herself to Marcus the next evening. She explained that what he had done was exactly the kind of approach they hoped for, but rarely saw from security personnel. The Marines needed to feel safe and respected, not viewed as problems to be solved or threats to be contained. As the weeks passed, Marcus developed a routine that went far beyond his basic security duties. He learned the names of every Marine in the wing, and made an effort to have brief, friendly conversations with those who were awake during his rounds. He discovered that many of them struggled with insomnia, spending long hours staring at the ceiling and wrestling with their thoughts. Marcus began carrying a small notebook where he jotted down details about each Marine's interests, hometown, and family. When he encountered someone during a difficult night, he could engage them in conversation about topics that mattered to them. He learned about Corporal Williams's plans to open a motorcycle repair shop, Sergeant Martinez's concern for his younger brother who was thinking about enlisting, and Private Johnson's hopes of returning to college to study engineering. The Marines began to look forward to seeing Marcus during his rounds. His genuine interest in their lives and his respectful approach made them feel valued as individuals rather than just patients or problems. They started calling him Mr. Marcus, and some would stay awake specifically hoping to catch him for a few minutes of conversation during the long, lonely night hours. The medical staff noticed remarkable improvements in the Marines' overall behavior and cooperation with treatment. Episodes of anxiety and confusion decreased significantly during the overnight hours. The Marines seemed more relaxed and trusting, which made it easier for doctors and nurses to provide effective care during the day. Marcus's approach was working, but he had no idea how profoundly he was impacting the lives of these young service members, or how their respect for him would eventually change his own life in ways he never could have imagined. 3 months into his job at the medical center, Marcus faced his biggest challenge yet. Lance Corporal David "Tank" Morrison had arrived at the facility after surviving an improvised explosive device attack that had killed 2 members of his unit and left him with severe burns on his arms and legs. Tank was angry, bitter, and refused to cooperate with most of the medical staff. He had already been through 2 security guards who requested transfers after Tank's aggressive behavior and constant verbal confrontations. Tank's room was at the end of the hall, and he had developed a reputation for throwing things at anyone who tried to enter without his permission. Nurses had to work in pairs when treating him, and even the doctors approached his room with caution. The young Marine was consumed with guilt over surviving when his friends had died, and his pain had transformed into rage that he directed at anyone who tried to help him. During Marcus's first encounter with Tank, the Marine immediately began shouting threats and accusations. He called Marcus a fake security guard who probably couldn't handle a real fight, and he questioned why Marcus had never served in the military himself. The verbal assault was harsh and personal, designed to drive Marcus away like it had driven away others, but Marcus didn't leave. He stood quietly in the doorway, absorbing the Marine's anger without getting defensive or angry in return. When Tank finally exhausted himself and fell silent, Marcus simply said that he understood Tank was in pain, both physical and emotional, and that he didn't expect Tank to like him or trust him right away. He told Tank that he would continue to check on him during rounds because it was his job to make sure everyone in the facility was safe, but he wouldn't force conversation or interaction. This response surprised Tank, who had expected Marcus to either argue back or retreat completely. Instead, Marcus continued his nightly rounds, stopping briefly at Tank's doorway to make sure he was okay, but never pushing for conversation or trying to minimize Tank's anger. Marcus treated Tank's rage as valid and understandable rather than as something that needed to be fixed or controlled. Slowly, Tank's curiosity began to overcome his hostility. One night, about 2 weeks after their first encounter, Tank asked Marcus why he kept coming back when he obviously wasn't welcome. Marcus sat down in the hallway outside Tank's room and shared the story of his father's service in Korea. He talked about the nightmares his father had experienced and how those experiences had taught Marcus that sometimes the strongest people carried the heaviest burdens. Tank listened without interrupting, and when Marcus finished, he asked a few questions about Marcus's father. That brief conversation opened a small crack in Tank's defensive wall, and over the following weeks that crack slowly widened. Tank began to tolerate Marcus's presence for longer periods, and eventually, he started sharing pieces of his own story. Tank told Marcus about the morning of the attack, how he had been joking with his buddies just minutes before the explosion changed everything. He talked about the guilt that ate at him every day, wondering why he had survived when better Marines had died. He described the physical pain of his burns and how it seemed insignificant, compared to the emotional agony of losing his friends. Marcus listened without trying to offer solutions or empty comfort. He acknowledged Tank's pain and validated his feelings of loss and guilt. Sometimes they sat in silence together, and sometimes Tank would share memories of his fallen friends, describing their personalities and dreams for the future that would never be fulfilled. The breakthrough came one night when Tank experienced a particularly severe panic attack triggered by a nightmare about the explosion. Marcus found him hyperventilating and clawing at his bandages, completely lost in the memory of that terrible day. Instead of calling for medical intervention immediately, Marcus sat with Tank and began using breathing techniques he had learned from watching the medical staff work with other patients. Marcus guided Tank through slow, controlled breathing while speaking in a calm, steady voice about being safe in the medical center, far away from any danger. He reminded Tank that his injuries were healing and that he was surrounded by people who wanted to help him recover. Gradually, Tank's breathing returned to normal and his grip on reality was restored. When the episode ended, Tank looked at Marcus with tears in his eyes and said something that would stay with Marcus forever. Tank told him that in all his time, in the Marines through basic training and combat deployments, he had never met anyone who showed as much courage as Marcus displayed every night by walking into rooms full of damaged, angry Marines and treating them with dignity and respect. Tank's transformation became a turning point for the entire wing. Other Marines had watched Marcus's patient work with their most difficult peer, and they began to understand that this security guard was different from anyone they had encountered before. Marcus wasn't trying to control them or fix them. He was simply offering them the respect and recognition they had been craving since returning from deployment. Marines who had been suspicious and hostile toward medical staff began opening up during Marcus's rounds. They shared stories about their service, their fears about returning to civilian life, and their struggles with feeling forgotten or misunderstood by a society that seemed to have moved on without them. Marcus became an unofficial counselor, providing a listening ear and genuine human connection during the darkest hours of their recovery. The medical staff noticed dramatic improvements throughout the wing. Treatment compliance increased significantly, and episodes of aggression or self-destructive behavior became much rarer. Dr. Chen documented these changes and began including Marcus in treatment planning discussions, recognizing that his relationship with the Marines was a crucial part of their healing process. Marcus had found his calling, though he didn't fully realize it yet. Each night he walked those halls knowing that his presence made a real difference in the lives of young people who had sacrificed so much for their country. The Marines were teaching him about courage, sacrifice, and brotherhood, while he was teaching them about compassion, patience, and the value of being truly seen and heard. What Marcus didn't know was that his impact on these Marines would soon extend far beyond the walls of the medical center, creating bonds that would last a lifetime and ultimately change how he viewed his own worth and purpose in the world. As Marcus entered his 6th month at the medical center, his relationship with the Marines had evolved into something none of them had expected. What started as a simple security job had become a mission that gave Marcus's life new meaning and purpose. The Marines had begun to view him as more than just a guard. He had become a trusted friend, confidant, and source of stability in their chaotic world of recovery and healing. The impact of Marcus's work became evident during a particularly difficult period when several new Marines arrived at the facility. These young men and women had been involved in a convoy attack that left multiple casualties, and they arrived angry, traumatized, and completely resistant to treatment. The medical staff was struggling to establish any kind of rapport with the new patients who viewed everyone with suspicion and hostility. Dr. Chen approached Marcus with an unusual request. She asked if he would be willing to spend extra time with the new arrivals, using his established relationship with the existing patients to help bridge the gap between the newcomers and the medical team. Marcus agreed without hesitation, understanding that his fellow Marines were counting on him to help their brothers and sisters in arms. Marcus began working closely with Tank and some of the other long-term patients to create an informal welcoming system for new arrivals. The existing patients would share their positive experiences with Marcus and explain how he had helped them through their darkest moments. This peer-to-peer recommendation carried weight that no medical professional could match, as the new patients trusted the word of fellow Marines who had walked the same difficult path. One of the new arrivals, Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez, had been particularly resistant to treatment. She had lost her best friend in the convoy attack and was struggling with severe survivor's guilt. Lisa had shut down emotionally, refusing to speak to doctors, nurses, or therapists. She spent most of her time staring out the window of her room, lost in memories and regret. Marcus approached Lisa's situation differently than he had with the male Marines. He understood that her experiences as a woman in combat came with additional layers of complexity, and that she might need a different kind of support. Instead of trying to engage her in direct conversation initially, Marcus began leaving small tokens of encouragement outside her room. Sometimes it was a newspaper article about her hometown baseball team. Other times it was a simple note wishing her a peaceful day. Lisa noticed these gestures but didn't respond for several weeks. Marcus continued his quiet support without expecting anything in return, understanding that healing happened on each individual's timeline. He made sure to include updates about Lisa in his conversations with other Marines, letting them know that she was struggling and could use their support when she was ready. The breakthrough came when Lisa overheard Marcus talking to Tank about a news story covering a charity motorcycle ride organized by veterans in her hometown. Lisa's father had been an avid motorcycle enthusiast, and she had grown up riding with him before his death when she was a teenager. The familiar connection to home and to her father's memory prompted her to finally speak up and ask Marcus about the details of the charity event. That brief conversation opened the door to a longer discussion about Lisa's relationship with her father and how his death had influenced her decision to join the Marines. Marcus listened as she talked about wanting to honor her father's memory by serving something bigger than herself, and how the loss of her friend in combat had made her question everything she believed about duty, sacrifice, and survival. Marcus shared his own experiences of loss and how his father's military service had shaped his understanding of honor and commitment. He helped Lisa see that her survival didn't diminish her friend's sacrifice, but rather gave her the opportunity to carry forward the values and dreams they had shared. Over the following weeks, Lisa began to open up to the medical staff and engage with her treatment plan. The success with Lisa and other new patients established Marcus as an integral part of the medical center's approach to treating Marines. His unofficial role expanded to include participating in intake assessments, helping to develop individualized treatment plans, and serving as a bridge between the medical staff and patients who were struggling to trust the system. Marcus's influence extended beyond individual patient relationships. He began organizing informal group activities during his shifts, bringing Marines together for late-night conversations about their experiences and their hopes for the future. These sessions became powerful healing opportunities, as Marines realized they weren't alone in their struggles and that their experiences were shared and understood by others who had walked similar paths. One of the most significant developments was the formation of what the Marines began calling the Night Watch Brotherhood. This informal support network included current patients, recently discharged Marines who stayed in touch with Marcus, and even some Marines who had transferred to other facilities but maintained contact with the group. Marcus became the central hub of this network, facilitating connections and providing ongoing support to Marines at various stages of their recovery. The Night Watch Brotherhood developed its own traditions and rituals. Marcus helped Marines create memory books for fallen friends, organized letter-writing campaigns to support Marines at other facilities, and facilitated connections between Marines who shared common interests or hometown connections. These activities gave the Marines a sense of purpose and community that extended beyond their individual treatment plans. The medical staff documented remarkable outcomes associated with Marcus's involvement. Average length of stay decreased as Marines became more engaged with treatment. Readmission rates dropped significantly as Marines maintained connections to support systems after discharge. Most importantly, several Marines credited Marcus with literally saving their lives during moments when they had lost hope and were considering harming themselves. Marcus had found his true calling, though he remained humble about his contributions. He saw himself simply as a person who cared about others and was willing to listen without judgment. The Marines saw him as something much more significant, a guardian angel who had appeared during their darkest hours and shown them that they still had value, purpose, and brothers who would never abandon them. As Marcus's second year at the medical center approached, neither he nor the Marines could have predicted the events that would soon test their bonds in ways they never imagined, ultimately demonstrating the true depth of the relationships that had been forged in those quiet hospital hallways during the darkest hours of the night. Marcus had been working at the medical center for nearly 2 years when he began experiencing health problems that he initially dismissed as simple fatigue from working night shifts. He started feeling tired during his rounds and occasionally short of breath when climbing stairs, but he attributed these symptoms to getting older and the stress of his demanding job. The Marines noticed that he seemed less energetic during their late-night conversations, but Marcus insisted he was fine and continued his regular duties with the same dedication and care. The truth was that Marcus had been ignoring warning signs for months because he couldn't bear the thought of letting down the Marines who had come to depend on him. His job had evolved far beyond security work. He had become a lifeline for dozens of young men and women who were fighting their own battles with trauma, guilt, and the challenge of rebuilding their lives after service. Marcus felt that taking time off for his own health concerns would be selfish when so many people needed his support. Dr. Chen had noticed subtle changes in Marcus's behavior and energy levels, but when she expressed concern, Marcus deflected her questions and assured her that he was managing fine. The Marines had also picked up on these changes, but Marcus had taught them so well about respecting boundaries and not pushing for information that wasn't offered that they followed his lead in treating his health as a private matter. The situation came to a head on a cold Tuesday morning in February when Marcus collapsed during his shift. He had been making his regular rounds when he suddenly felt dizzy and struggled to breathe. Tank, who had been awake reading in his room, heard Marcus call for help and immediately pressed his call button to alert the medical staff. Within minutes, nurses and doctors were surrounding Marcus and he was rushed to the emergency department. The diagnosis was devastating. Marcus had suffered a significant heart attack, and further testing revealed that he had advanced coronary artery disease that would require immediate surgery and extensive treatment. The doctors explained that his condition was serious and that he would need to take several months off work to recover, with no guarantee that he would be able to return to his physically demanding security job. News of Marcus's condition spread quickly through the Marines' wing, and the impact was immediate and profound. These young people who had learned to trust again, who had found stability and hope through their relationship with Marcus, suddenly faced the possibility of losing the person who had become their anchor. The medical staff watched with concern as several Marines withdrew into themselves, refusing to engage with treatment or participate in therapy sessions. Tank, who had transformed from one of the most difficult patients to one of the most cooperative, became the unofficial spokesman for the group. He approached Dr. Chen with a request that surprised her. The Marines wanted to organize themselves to support Marcus during his recovery, just as he had supported them during their darkest moments. They wanted to visit him, help with his medical expenses, and ensure that he knew his work had made a lasting difference in their lives. Dr. Chen was initially hesitant about patients becoming involved in their caregiver's personal life, but she recognized that this situation was unique. The relationship between Marcus and the Marines had transcended typical professional boundaries, and their desire to support him was clearly motivated by genuine care and gratitude rather than unhealthy dependency. The Marines organized a rotation system to visit Marcus during his hospital stay and recovery period. They brought him books, magazines, and updates about what was happening in the wing. More importantly, they shared stories about how his influence had changed their lives and their relationships with their families. Tank told Marcus about reconnecting with his parents for the first time since his deployment. Lisa shared that she had enrolled in college and was planning to study social work to help other veterans. During these visits, Marcus learned things about the Marines' lives that they had never shared before. Sergeant Martinez revealed that Marcus's encouragement had prevented him from attempting suicide during his darkest night at the facility. Corporal Williams explained that Marcus's belief in his motorcycle repair shop dream had given him the confidence to apply for a small business loan. Private Johnson credited Marcus with helping him understand that surviving combat didn't make him weak or broken, but rather gave him unique strength and perspective. The Marines also coordinated with their families and other veterans organizations to establish a fund to help cover Marcus's medical expenses and living costs during his recovery. Word about Marcus's situation spread through the broader veterans community, and donations began arriving from Marines stationed around the world who had heard about his work through the Night Watch Brotherhood network. These gestures of support had a profound impact on Marcus's recovery, both physically and emotionally. He had spent his entire adult life taking care of other people, from his own family to customers in various jobs to the Marines at the medical center. He had never experienced being the recipient of such organized, heartfelt care from people who genuinely valued his contribution to their lives. Marcus began to understand that his work had created something much larger than he had realized. The Marines weren't just grateful patients. They had become a family that was willing to fight for one of their own. Their visits and support gave Marcus the motivation he needed to comply with his medical treatment and work toward recovery. Even when the process was difficult and frustrating, the medical staff at the center also witnessed something remarkable during Marcus's absence. The Marines had internalized many of his approaches to supporting each other, and they began applying these techniques with new patients who arrived during his recovery period. Tank and Lisa worked together to welcome newcomers, sharing their own experiences and providing the same patient, non-judgmental support that Marcus had modeled for them. Dr. Chen documented these developments as evidence of how powerful therapeutic relationships could create lasting positive changes that extended far beyond the original caregiver-patient interaction. The Marines had learned not just to receive support, but to provide it to others, creating a sustainable system of peer assistance that would continue even without Marcus's direct involvement. As Marcus slowly regained his strength over the following months, he received regular updates about the progress of various Marines and the continued success of the support networks they had established. He realized that his greatest achievement wasn't just helping individual Marines through their crises, but teaching them how to help each other and create lasting bonds of brotherhood and mutual support. The experience of being cared for by the Marines taught Marcus lessons about the true nature of service and sacrifice that would fundamentally change how he viewed his own life and future. Marcus thrived in his new role as Veterans Peer Support Coordinator for the next 15 years, becoming a legend within the military medical community. His approach to caring for Marines was studied and replicated at facilities across the country, and he trained hundreds of staff members in the techniques he had developed through years of patient, compassionate service. The Night Watch Brotherhood had grown into a national network that connected thousands of Marines and provided support systems that lasted long after their medical treatment was complete. When Marcus reached his 70th birthday, he began to slow down physically, but his dedication to the Marines never wavered. He had witnessed the recovery and success of hundreds of young men and women who had arrived at the medical center broken and hopeless, only to leave with renewed purpose and strong support networks. Many had gone on to successful careers, started families, and become leaders in their communities, carrying forward the lessons about brotherhood and service that Marcus had taught them. The medical center had become a model facility that attracted visitors from around the world who wanted to understand how civilian staff could create such powerful, therapeutic relationships with military patients. Marcus's methods had been incorporated into official training protocols, and his story was taught in military psychology programs and veterans affairs courses at universities across the country. Despite his advancing age and increasing health challenges, Marcus continued to work part-time, focusing on the most difficult cases and mentoring new staff members. The Marines still sought him out for advice and support, and many would bring their spouses and children to meet the man who had played such a crucial role in their recovery and success. Marcus's small apartment was filled with photos, letters, and mementos from Marines around the world who considered him family. On a quiet Thursday evening in November, Marcus suffered another heart attack while working late in his office, reviewing case files for new patients who were arriving the following week. Tank, who now served as a peer counselor at the facility, found Marcus at his desk and called for emergency medical assistance. Despite the best efforts of the medical team, Marcus passed away peacefully in the early hours of Friday morning, surrounded by Marines who had rushed to the hospital to be with him. The news of Marcus's death spread quickly through the Night Watch Brotherhood network and the broader Marine community. Within hours, Marines from across the country were making arrangements to attend his funeral, wanting to pay their respects to the man who had touched their lives so profoundly. Tank and Lisa worked together to coordinate the funeral arrangements, determined to honor Marcus in a way that reflected the impact he had made on their lives. The funeral was held at the largest church in Portland, but even that venue was not large enough to accommodate everyone who wanted to attend. Marines arrived from every corner of the United States, many wearing their dress blue uniforms despite having been out of active service for years. They brought their families, their children, and their own stories of how Marcus had influenced their lives and their approach to serving others. Dr. Chen delivered a eulogy that captured the essence of Marcus's character and the scope of his influence. She spoke about a man who had never served in the military, but had embodied the Marine Corps values of honor, courage, and commitment more fully than many who had worn the uniform. She described how Marcus had transformed not just individual lives, but an entire approach to treating veterans with the dignity and respect they deserved. Tank spoke on behalf of the Marines, sharing stories about Marcus's patience during their darkest moments and his unwavering belief in their potential for recovery and success. He explained how Marcus had taught them that true strength came not from hiding their wounds, but from helping others heal from similar injuries. Tank announced that the Marines had established the Marcus Johnson Foundation, which would provide training and support for civilian staff working with military patients at medical facilities. Around the world, Lisa shared how Marcus had shown her that survival could be transformed into service, and that the pain of loss could become a source of strength for helping others. She described the dozens of veterans she had helped through her social work career, each success built on the foundation of compassion and respect that Marcus had modeled for her during her own recovery. As the service concluded, something extraordinary happened that no one had planned or coordinated. 50 Marines who had been directly helped by Marcus during their treatment at the medical center stood up simultaneously and formed an honor guard for his casket. These were Marines from different units, different conflicts and different time periods, but they were united by their shared experience of Marcus's care and their desire to honor his memory. The honor guard accompanied Marcus's casket to the cemetery, where hundreds of Marines and their families gathered for the burial service. As the casket was lowered into the ground, the Marines rendered a final salute to the civilian who had earned their respect through his selfless service to their brotherhood. In the weeks following the funeral, letters and tributes poured in from around the world. The Marine Corps Commandant issued a statement recognizing Marcus's contributions to Marine welfare and announcing that the Distinguished Civilian Service Award would be renamed the Marcus Johnson Award in his honor. The Department of Veterans Affairs adopted many of his support techniques as standard practices for all military medical facilities. The medical center created a memorial garden in Marcus's honor, with a plaque that read, "In memory of Marcus Johnson, who taught us that the greatest form of security is knowing that someone cares enough to listen, without judgment and love without conditions." The garden became a place of reflection and peace for Marines and their families, continuing Marcus's legacy of providing comfort during difficult times. Most importantly, the Marines who had been touched by Marcus's life continued to pass forward his lessons about compassion, brotherhood, and service. They became the teachers and mentors for new generations of Marines, ensuring that Marcus's influence would continue to spread long after his death. The security guard, who had started with a simple job protecting a building, had ultimately protected something much more valuable: the hope, dignity, and brotherhood of the Marines who had given so much for their country. Marcus Johnson had lived a life that proved the truth of a principle he had always believed. The most important security anyone can provide is the security that comes from knowing you are valued, respected, and never forgotten by those whose lives you have touched. After 6 months of recovery and rehabilitation, Marcus faced a difficult decision about his future. His doctors had cleared him to return to work, but with significant restrictions. He could no longer handle the physical demands of overnight security patrols, and his cardiologist recommended a less stressful job with regular hours. The medical center offered Marcus a position in their administrative offices, but the thought of sitting behind a desk all day felt like a prison sentence to someone who had found such purpose in direct service to others. Marcus struggled with feelings of uselessness and depression as he contemplated a future without the meaningful work that had given his life direction. The Marines continued to visit and call regularly, but Marcus worried that he was becoming a burden to young people who needed to focus on their own recovery and future plans. He began to withdraw from these relationships, telling himself that it would be better for everyone if he stepped back and let the Marines move forward without depending on him. Tank recognized what was happening and organized an intervention that would change everything. Without telling Marcus, he coordinated with Lisa, Dr. Chen, and several other Marines to plan a surprise that would show Marcus exactly how much his work had meant and how it was continuing to impact lives far beyond the medical center. Was on a Saturday afternoon in September, Tank called Marcus and asked him to meet for coffee at a small diner near the medical center. Marcus agreed, thinking he was simply catching up with one Marine who wanted to maintain their friendship. When Marcus arrived at the diner, he was shocked to find nearly 30 people waiting for him, including current and former patients from the Marines wing, their family members, medical staff from the center, and several people he didn't recognize. Tank stood up and explained that these people had gathered to share stories about how Marcus's work had created ripple effects that extended far beyond anyone's imagination. He introduced Marcus to Sarah Chen's teenage daughter, who explained that her mother's stories about Marcus had inspired her to volunteer at a local veterans shelter. One of the unrecognized faces belonged to a Marine from a different facility who had heard about Marcus's approach through the Night Watch Brotherhood network and had used similar techniques to help fellow Marines at his own treatment center. Lisa shared that she had completed her first semester of social work school with honors and was specializing in veterans mental health services. She told Marcus that she carried his lessons about patience, listening, and treating people with dignity into every interaction with the homeless veterans she worked with at a local outreach program. Her work had already helped connect 12 veterans with mental health services and permanent housing. Sergeant Martinez had opened a small restaurant that specifically hired veterans transitioning back to civilian life. He explained that Marcus's example of seeing potential in people who had been written off by others had inspired him to create opportunities for Marines who were struggling to find employment. The restaurant had become a gathering place for local veterans and a model for similar businesses in other cities. Corporal Williams had successfully opened his motorcycle repair shop and was offering free services to disabled veterans in his community. He credited Marcus with teaching him that success wasn't just about personal achievement, but about using your abilities to serve others. Williams had also started a motorcycle club for veterans that organized charity rides and provided emotional support for members dealing with post-deployment adjustment challenges. The stories continued for over 2 hours, each one revealing another way that Marcus's approach to caring for others had been passed forward and multiplied. Dr. Chen presented Marcus with a folder containing letters from Marines around the country who had heard about his work and wanted to express their gratitude. Many of these Marines had never met Marcus personally, but had benefited from the culture of support and brotherhood that his work had helped create. The most powerful moment came when Tank's parents approached Marcus. Tank's father, a Vietnam veteran who had struggled with his own post-war adjustment, thanked Marcus for giving him his son back. He explained that Tank had been so angry and bitter when he first returned from deployment that the family had feared they had lost him forever. Marcus's patient work had not only helped Tank heal, but had taught the entire family how to support each other through difficult times. Tank's mother presented Marcus with a scrapbook that contained photos and letters from dozens of Marines and their families. Each page documented another life that had been touched by Marcus's influence, either directly or through the Marines he had taught to support each other. The final page contained a letter signed by over 50 Marines from around the world, expressing their gratitude and explaining that they considered Marcus to be an honorary member of their brotherhood. The gathering concluded with an announcement that surprised Marcus completely. The Marine Corps had heard about his work through Dr. Chen's research publications and the advocacy of Marines he had helped. They were creating a new civilian award to recognize individuals who had made extraordinary contributions to Marine welfare without seeking recognition or personal gain. Marcus would be the first recipient of the Distinguished Civilian Service Award for his work with Marines in medical recovery. More importantly, the Marines had worked together to create a new position at the medical center, specifically for Marcus. The veteran's peer support coordinator role would allow him to continue his relationship-building work with Marines while accommodating his health restrictions. The position came with a significant salary increase and would serve as a model for similar programs at other military medical facilities. Around the country, Marcus was overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and respect from people whose lives he had touched. He realized that his concern about becoming useless had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what made his work valuable. The Marines didn't need him to be their security guard. They needed him to be their friend, mentor, and example of how to treat others with dignity and compassion. As he looked around the room at the faces of people whose lives had been changed by his simple decision to listen without judgment and care without conditions, Marcus understood that his heart attack had not ended his purpose but had revealed its true scope. His work was no longer just about helping individual Marines through crisis. It was about teaching and modeling an approach to human relationships that could transform entire communities. The celebration that day marked not the end of Marcus's career, but the beginning of a new chapter in which his influence would spread to military medical facilities across the country, touching thousands of lives and creating a lasting legacy of compassion and brotherhood that would continue long after he was gone.